Data, shall we go? Gentlemen.
Hello everyone, Jay Warden here, and welcome to my recap and review of the episode Elementary Dear Data, our second holodeck goes wrong adventure where Data enters the world of Sherlock Holmes and has to face down Moriarty. Don't forget all those spoilers ahead, otherwise, enjoy. As the Enterprise lounges around for a few days waiting for the USS Victory, LaForge shows off his hand-built model of the HMS Victory as a present to his former captain. He then gives Data his Sherlock Holmes pipe and says he's ready to have some fun being Watson while they wait, and they both head excitedly off to the holodeck. Once in costume, Data selects a random scenario from the Sherlock series, and after giving LaForge a tour and an overview of Sherlock's home, the scenario begins and they throw themselves into the role. But Data quickly ruins the whole thing by jumping straight to the end and solving the puzzle immediately, pissing LaForge off, who promptly exits the holodeck, leaving Data confused. Later in 10 Forward, LaForge explains to Data why he ruined everything because they went to the holodeck to solve a Sherlock Holmes mystery, and as Data has it all memorised and knows all the details, there's no mystery to solve and thus it's no fun for LaForge. Data still isn't quite getting it though, and Pulaski chimes in saying it's pointless trying because Data is just a machine and that while he does have the capacity for deductive reasoning, he doesn't understand the human soul the way Holmes does. LaForge thinks Pulaski's being unfair, but Pulaski disagrees and says Data would have no chance in solving a genuine Holmes mystery. LaForge suggests that they program the computer to come up with a new Holmes-like mystery, and Data accepts the challenge and invites Pulaski along so he can prove her wrong. So once again we're back on the holodeck and Data has programmed in a random set of parameters taken from the Sherlock universe, and proceeds to apparently deduce a set of events correctly. However, Pulaski calls him out on it because it's simply random elements taken from existing Sherlock novels that Data already knows about, and thus proving her earlier point that all he's doing is using his vast information storage and recitation rather than genuinely solving a mystery. So it's back to the drawing board and LaForge calls for the Arch, which doesn't go unnoticed by one of the holo characters. This time LaForge tells the computer to come up with a mystery that confounds Data and to create an adversary who has the ability to defeat him. The computer complies and off they go, but on the bridge Worf notices an unusual surge of power on his console before it disappears. As the trio wander off, the holo character who noticed them earlier seems to be overcome with a sense of being a whole new man and calls for the Arch, something holo characters shouldn't be able to do. And after some poking around we found out that this chap is actually Professor Moriarty. Moriarty decides he needs more information before messing around with the Arch and then wanders off. As Data and LaForge stroll through the streets, they hear a scream and find Pulaski is now missing. Data, fully throwing himself into the role, goes through a series of deductions on what happened to her before excitedly saying that the game's afoot and off they go. They chase what seem to be footsteps and Data proves to LaForge he's genuinely making deductions about Pulaski, but as they continue to search they unexpectedly come up against a dead end, confusing Data. But before they can search further, Inspector Lestrade arrives and drags them off to a dead body in the street. Data once again quickly deduces what happens and points out the murderer, but catches a glimpse of Moriarty which piques his interest and concludes the murder has nothing to do with Pulaski's kidnapping, and after excusing himself in the crowd gives chase. Data thinks Moriarty wants them to find him, and although apparently coming up against another dead end, they find a hidden doorway, enter a lab, and finally come face to face with Moriarty. He seems to know things that he shouldn't though, including that Data and LaForge are not Holmes and Watson, and there are ideas and images in his mind that he doesn't quite understand, and a great power called computer, which controls everything, and to prove his point he calls for the Arch, shocking LaForge and Data. He then hands Data a piece of paper and asks him what it's all about, which shocks Data further, prompting him to quickly leave and call for the exit. Once outside, Data tries to shut down the holodeck but is denied access and says he's got to go see the captain ASAP, and shows LaForge what's on the paper, which turns out to be a crude drawing of the Enterprise, and tells him that Moriarty has somehow gained control of the computer. So it's time for a meeting. LaForge updates Picard and the others on what happened leading up to this, and LaForge realises that he asks the computer to create an opponent capable of defeating Data, not Sherlock Holmes. Data is also concerned that Pulaski is in danger because the safeties have likely been deactivated, and while they could try to forcibly destroy the holodeck's constructs, it would unfortunately kill Pulaski as well. Troy then says she's sensing a consciousness developing, and Data theorises that for the computer to comply with LaForge's request, it literally had to create a conscious being, because of course a computer can just do that when it's asked to. They're interrupted by a sudden shaking of the ship, and Picard decides it's time he gets into costume and deal with the situation himself. Back in Moriarty's lair, he's entertaining Pulaski with tea and crumpets, trying to get answers from her, but she's playing dumb and acting as if this is all strange to her. He knows she's lying though and tells her she'll be the bait to lure Picard down to his lair, and sure enough Picard is ready to enter along with a costumed-up Worf who looks rather dashing. After wandering through a degenerating simulation and avoiding a mugging, Picard finally arrives, and after displaying his ability to shake the ship again, Moriarty expresses his desire to leave the holodeck because now he's far more than a mere simulated construct and desires to see the real world. Picard and Moriarty have a nice back and forth on the nature of life, consciousness and perceptions of reality, but it all comes down to the fact that it's impossible for Moriarty to leave the holodeck because holographic matter simply vanishes when it leaves. Oh. Eventually Moriarty comes to terms that it's simply beyond their capability to enter the real world, and so surrenders himself to his fate, but with the promise that Picard will save his program and reactivate it one day when they find a way to let him live outside the holodeck. Moriarty is pleased with this solution and is finally saved and deactivated. With the day saved, Picard checks in on LaForge quickly, where his model of the HMS Victory took a bit of minor damage, but tells him not to worry about his mistake of becoming God and giving life out of nothing, and that all is well. Well, this was definitely a fun little episode, with a great guest star and a much better holodeck adventure I think than Season 1's The Big Goodbye. Also, unlike that episode, it goes further in examining the nature of sentience and self-awareness. You do have to simply accept though that the computer can magically create a sentient, self-aware computer program by simply saying a few words, which is a massive can of worms when you think about it. But let's just take it at face value because this is Star Trek, and sometimes you just get a ridiculous premise that ends up being a good or even great episode. First off, I must give huge praise to Daniel Davis who plays Moriarty, by far one of the best guest stars we've had so far since John Delancey's Q. He brings a great intelligence and intensity to his performance, always being utterly polite and courteous, yet also coming across as sinister at times without breaking that civilized demeanour or slipping into melodrama. He gets a fantastic speech at the end with Picard as they debate the nature of his reality and existence and his desire not to die, to keep living, as well as his utter fascination with everything he's learnt, yearning to know more. He elevates the material and bounces off Patrick Stewart so wonderfully. Davis really helps to sell this sense of wonder and frustration at his newfound knowledge that I can only imagine how that would really feel if I was put into that kind of situation. How tragic would it be if you woke up one morning with all this newfound knowledge about existence which completely transforms your understanding of the world, but without any ability to even reach out and explore that? The Big Goodbye very briefly touched on this idea of a hologram that became aware of its own existence when, at the end, Picard's detective friend asks what will happen to him once Picard leaves. But that episode decided not to even ask any real questions or debate the issue there. And while this episode doesn't go into too much detail either, I mean we really only spend about 2 to 3 minutes on the subject, I'm so glad it decided to at least posit the questions about the nature of reality and one's own existence. It's a real shame we only ever get one more Sherlock Holmes adventure, of a sort, when Moriarty returns in the Season 6 episode, Ship in a Bottle. It seems the producers ran into some legal issues with the estate of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle notifying Paramount that they still retained a percentage of the rights to the character of Sherlock Holmes, and as such would require a usage fee if the character was used again, which unfortunately took several years to resolve. Not the first time Trek will get into trouble for using or parodying an IP that it didn't have the legal rights to either. The initial idea regarding Data's ability to solve a mystery though is a good one, and I think the use of Pulaski's attitude towards Data is a great way in setting this up, positing that Data is simply unable to genuinely solve a detective mystery because to do that needs something more intangible than just the mere facts of a situation. If there's one great flaw of the episode, it's that this idea gets sidelined completely once the threat of Moriarty taking over the ship takes centre stage. Nonetheless, Data does do some decent deducing here, I think, once Pulaski is captured by Moriarty, and arguably proves her wrong because of it. But as we never really follow through on that once Moriarty reveals himself, they never get to resume this debate, which is a real shame in my opinion, as I wouldn't mind Pulaski being taken down a peg or two, and realising that Data is more than just a mere machine. The opening holodeck sequence with LaForge and Data is perhaps a little too self-indulgent though, spending a bit too much time educating LaForge about his role in the various aspects of Sherlock. I just felt that could have been done off camera or in passing somehow before they stepped onto the holodeck. However, watching LaForge's expression turn from excitement to pure annoyance once Data immediately jumps to the end is fun, as we can't help but sympathise with how he feels. As he later says to Data, what's the point of having fun solving a mystery if Data jumps to the end having known it already? There is one very obvious plot hole about halfway through when Data takes the drawing of the Enterprise off the holodeck. As we know, holographic matter cannot survive outside the holodeck due to a lack of holo emitters, and so as soon as Data walked off, it should have immediately disappeared. Yes, you could argue that as it's a similar principle to the replicator, it could be just a replicated piece of paper, but the aforementioned Season 6 episode thoroughly disproves this when Picard throws a holographic book off the holodeck, which shows it instantly dematerializing. To be fair though, Season 1 twice had holographic matter exist outside of the holodeck, in both cases water. Once when Wesley falls into the pond and he comes out dripping wet, and another when a snowball hits Picard. In any case, as obvious a plot hole as the piece of paper may be, it's completely forgivable in my opinion in service to the story. the costume and set design in this episode is great, and it's just nice to occasionally step outside the usual spandex designed jumpsuits into something far more elegant and decorative. Patrick Stewart in particular looks absolutely at home in his costume, and why not given his theatrical background, and it being a more classic literary work which was his bread and butter before Star Trek and X-Men. There's also this little moment where he taps his hat loudly before he puts it on, and the reactions of Riker, Data and Worf suggest this might have been improvised by Stewart, or at the very least that tapping sound was far louder than they anticipated. And how about that Worf, eh? Seeing Worf in any kind of costume outside his normal uniform is always a doozy for me, though in this case an utterly wasted effort on his part, as all he really does is stand outside the holodeck in case Picard needs him. I feel the episode only really did this so we can all look at Worf in his costume and be amused. Well, it worked, so I'll forgive it. I think he looks way better in a tuxedo though. So, a really fun episode for me, and despite the first episode being mostly a failure, Season 2 is so far doing a fair bit better than Season 1 in terms of quality. Let's see if this continues in the next episode, The Outrageous O'Connor, where we meet a charming young rogue who loves the ladies but gets the crew involved in the middle of a family drama. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did then please do check out my other reviews as well, and also if you haven't yet please like, subscribe and share. Until next time, this is Jay Warden, signing off.